Okay, let's dive into this. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating and absolutely explosive documentary called What the Health. Directed by Kip Anderson, this film, well, it completely shook up the nutrition and agriculture worlds. It makes some incredibly bold assertions about the real root causes of chronic disease here in the US, and it points to some allegedly hidden financial webs that keep those causes in the dark. We're going to systematically break down the arguments presented in this source material, looking right at the data and the claims the filmmakers use to build their case.
Because the entire documentary really hinges on this one massive, overarching investigative question. Is the food we trust, like the food recommended by our very own government and leading health organizations, actually making us sick? The film's narrator kind of starts his journey as a self-proclaimed hypochondriac, worried about a family history of diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. He follows all the standard health advice, only to stumble upon research that basically makes him question everything he thought he knew about a healthy diet. The film sets out to argue that the standard American diet isn't just flawed, but it's the actual, active driving force behind our widespread health crises.
To understand exactly how the documentary builds this argument, we'll walk through four major pillars today. First, diet and chronic disease. Second, following the health money. Third, communities and environment. And finally, the plant-based solution. So let's start with part one, diet and chronic disease. To really lay down its central thesis about what's driving our most debilitating illnesses, the documentary throws a huge spotlight on the scale of the medical industry. Get this. Treating chronic diseases in the U.S., things like heart disease, cancer, and diabetes, is a $1.5 trillion industry. Trillion with a T. The filmmakers argue that the American medical system operates almost entirely from a disease model. In their view, the system is basically in the business of treating sick people and managing their symptoms with expensive procedures and a lifetime of pharmaceutical drugs, rather than actually preventing people from getting sick in the first place. And the film illustrates the sheer gravity of this by focusing on diabetes. They claim we're in the middle of an absolute diabetes epidemic, with about 350 million people suffering worldwide. Now, to put that into perspective, in the United States alone, a staggering 1 in 3 Medicare dollars is spent solely on the care of people with diabetes. They argue that this is just an unsustainable cascade, one that is entirely driven by lifestyle and diet choices. So, the crucial point is how the film actually redefines the root cause of this epidemic. We're traditionally taught that sugar and carbohydrates cause diabetes, right? But the medical experts they interview, like Dr. Neil Bernard, argue the exact opposite. They claim that a meat-based, animal-heavy diet actually causes tiny particles of fat to build up in human muscle cells. And this fat buildup, that's what causes insulin resistance. It means the natural sugars you eat get trapped in your blood instead of entering your cells. So according to the documentary, it's not the sugar causing the diabetes at all. It's actually the animal fat blocking the sugar's path. Which brings us to one of the most shocking moments in the film. The documentary leans heavily on the World Health Organization's classification of processed meats. We're talking hot dogs, bacon, sausage, deli meats. The WHO classifies these as Group 1 carcinogens. That means that turkey sandwich you might grab for lunch, the WHO places that in the exact same carcinogenic category as asbestos, plutonium, and tobacco smoke. The film argues that eating these processed meats is definitively linked to higher rates of colorectal cancer. Yet the general public is largely kept in the dark about how severe this risk actually is.
That leads us right into part two, following the health money.
This perceived lack of public awareness drives the filmmaker to ask a huge question. Why aren't our leading health organizations sounding the alarm on meat and dairy? And this brilliantly illustrates what the filmmaker claims to have uncovered, a massive conflict of interest. They present evidence showing that major health organizations are actively funded by the very industries the film blames for causing the disease. They show the American Diabetes Association taking money from Dannon and Kraft, the American Cancer Society, funded by meat giant Tyson, the American Heart Association taking cash from beef producers, and breast cancer charity Susan G. Komen partnering with KFC and dairy brands. The film argues this is exactly why you'll see recipes for beef and processed meats on their websites, literally comparing it to the American Lung Association taking money from big tobacco. And the film doesn't stop at charities. It points the finger right at the government, too.
They dive into something called checkoff programs. These are federally mandated marketing schemes where the USDA, the exact government body tasked with dictating our dietary guidelines, is simultaneously working to boost the sales of meat and dairy. As an example, the documentary highlights a dairy checkoff program that spent $12 million to create a marketing campaign with Domino's Pizza, designed purely to push products with extra heavy layers of cheese. The film argues the USDA is prioritizing producer profits way above public health.
All right, moving on to part 3, communities and environment. Stepping outside the human body for a second, the filmmakers look at the systemic impacts of animal agriculture. They travel down to North Carolina to investigate industrial hog farming, and they drop a truly staggering statistic. They state that the 10 million pigs farmed in North Carolina produced an amount of untreated waste equivalent to 100 million human beings. To put that completely wild number in perspective, they claim it's as if the entire U.S. eastern seaboard were flushing their toilets directly into the state, completely unfiltered. Just let that sink in. The documentary details the localized fallout from this, which they claim is absolutely horrific. The pig waste is kept in these giant open-air pits and then actually sprayed directly onto fields. That runoff leaches into the rivers, causing massive fish kills. But even more importantly, the film interviews local residents who report overwhelmingly high rates of asthma, sinus issues, and cancer. The filmmakers frame this as way more than just an environmental disaster. They frame it as a profound civil rights issue, noting that these highly polluting facilities are disproportionately placed right next to low-income communities and communities of color.
This brings us to our final section, Part 4, the plant-based solution.
After outlining these massive, intertwined health and environmental crises, the documentary proposes a single, unified remedy. And to back this up, the doctors in the film make a really interesting biological argument. They assert that human beings are not anatomically true omnivores. When you compare us to a true omnivore, like a bear, the differences are pretty stark. Humans have flat molars for grinding plants, our jaws move side to side, we have very long intestines, and relatively weak stomach acid. True omnivores and carnivores, they have serrated teeth for tearing, jaws that only open up and down, short intestinal tracts to pass rotting meat quickly, and highly acidic stomachs. The documentary claims our anatomy actually perfectly matches frugivores, primates designed from the ground up to eat plants and fruits.
Now, you're probably thinking the exact same thing everyone thinks. Wait, where do you get your protein? Well, the film presents this fundamental biological counterargument. All protein is initially made by plants. The doctors explain that only plants can take nitrogen from the air and synthesize it into amino acids. So they argue any protein you get from eating a cow or a chicken is really just recycled plant protein. The film claims that a diet consisting of just brown rice and broccoli provides more than enough high-quality protein for any human being.
The film wraps up by summarizing the sweeping benefits of a purely plant-based whole food diet. Clinically speaking, the doctors share studies claiming this diet can literally reverse heart disease by clearing plaque right out of your arteries and essentially cure type 2 diabetes by allowing patients to drop their medications entirely. Logistically, they tackle the whole myth of expense, showing it can cost roughly $25 a week per person. And physically, they feature elite powerlifters, NFL players, and vegan Ironman athletes who all claim the diet drastically reduces joint inflammation, speeds up recovery, and builds immense strength, all without the acidic load of animal products. It's a whole lot to digest, isn't it? The documentary What the Health leaves its audience with a radically different picture of our food system. It challenges nearly every single piece of conventional wisdom we have about meat, dairy, and the big organizations that guide our health. By presenting these specific scientific, financial, and environmental arguments, the filmmakers clearly want to force a paradigm shift. So, given the claims we've unpacked in this explainer today, how will you view your next meal? Will you look at your plate a little differently? Thank you so much for joining me, and keep questioning what's on your fork.